A very good afternoon, distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vani and I have the pleasure of being your MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, ISAS, at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the ISAS book launch and panel discussion titled India's Eastward Engagement from Antiquity to Act East Policy. I now invite Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of ISAS, and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, to deliver the opening remarks. Ambassador Pillai, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Muni, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon, as I said. Thank you for joining us for this launch and the panel discussion on the book titled India's Eastward Engagement from Antiquity to Act East Policy. At the very outset, let me thank Professor Muni for having this book launch in Singapore. Professor Muni was one of the pioneers of ISAS, the scholar team that we had. He was one of them, and he helped us to set up ISAS. During after he finished his term, he went back, and then he used to have visiting trips to us. He did mention to me about this book, and I was quick to make him commit that this book will be launched in Singapore. And now he has done it, and I'm very grateful to him. I will not usurp the function of the panelists by discussing the book, but I would like to mention three, like Professor Tomiko mentioned, three factors that I like to highlight. Divide the period into three areas, three time zones. You take the ancient past. When you're not a scholar or an academic, you can play around with terminology. It's forgiven if you use the wrong terminology. But when I say ancient past, I mean the period before 1500. At that time, the Indian culture was deeply embedded in the culture of Southeast Asia. This is in spite of the fact that almost every kingdom in Southeast Asia paid homage to the Emperor of China. And Indian culture flourished under that. The Chinese were very comfortable. They did not feel threatened by this because their economy was so large. And it was a sustaining factor for the smaller economies of the smaller countries. So as long as that went on, the Chinese were willing to welcome the scholars, the priests, the traders from India, and they flourished also. So you have a situation where Indian culture made it possible for India to have a very meaningful relationship with the region. Then came the second part, the second point, and that is what happened during the Cold War and immediately after the Cold War. I would call it a sort of a rupture in the relationship. It's too harsh a word, but it amounts to that. I think one would have thought that having this great advantage of having a culture that is embedded in a region, you would automatically turn in that direction in your building up of your foreign relations. But India did not do that. I would agree with the authors, or the author, that India is not solely to be blamed. Yes, I agree. But India was irritated by organizations like CETO, CENTO in the north, in the northwest, and they kept away. Unfortunately, some of this very cold wind that chilled the relationship prevails even today, because it has not totally gone. Attempts are made, but it doesn't do very much, because some harm has been done. The Indian side turned more and more to Africa, Middle East, the non-aligned movement, and there were instances that I know of, conferences held, where Indian representatives gave a cold shoulder to some of the countries of Southeast Asia. I suppose that we are not having any reporters. Two countries particularly were not on the good books of India: Thailand and Philippines, because they were both members of CETO. And therefore, Krishna Menon and company didn't like them. And I remember I'm told, the Bandung conference, some conversation that took place, very harsh words were used to describe some of them. So that was the situation in the second aspect. Now comes the third one, that is the future. And I think the future looks more promising. I'm more optimistic on this. But as I said, some cold wind still blows, and you need to attack it. The thing to ask is, what do we do to ensure Act East policy materializes into a meaningful relationship between India and Southeast Asia? I think there are several factors that bring countries together. If you look at people-to-people relations, there had been very strong relations in the ancient past, as I said, but that had been watered down and it's no longer there. But the possibility of trade and investment was there. But India was always a difficult place to do business. That's a perception. And India does nothing to try and make up for this by some other factors. So this made it difficult. If there is a trade negotiations, it is more than likely that it breaks down because India has taken a very strong position. You look at the RCEP or RCEP discussions going on for 6 years, something like 30-odd meetings, but the end is still not in sight. We're still supposed to be talking. Now, why should this be so difficult? You know, ISAS, we organized something called the South Asian Diaspora Conference. In the first or second one, that would be about 4 years or 5 years ago, Tarun Das, who was a mentor for CCI, whatever the name is, the trade body from India, made a suggestion that India should open its economy, open totally, unconditionally, to all the SAARC countries. Tarun was the toast of the day. Almost every other non-Indian participant in the conference, they had more than 1,000 people, stood up to support Tarun. Said, a large country with tremendous potential can afford to do this. And they should do this not as just a gesture sort of thing, but as a means of forging close relationship. But these things don't seem to fall on, receptive ears, fall on dead ears sort of thing, So nothing is done about it. So I think you look at trade and you see what can be done. You open up your borders, bring in the tourists, open up the skies, and let them come in. And the third one, I think we go back to what India's strong point was, and that is culture. I think the Indian culture is a very almost addictive culture. It has got tremendous sort of magnetic qualities. I was, 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Jakarta, and on Sunday evening, I had nothing to do. Some Indonesian friends came and said, let's go and walk along the beach, a lot of people, and you can get some soak in the atmosphere. So I did. I went there. I saw a group of children, not small with tiny tots, but 10, 12-year-old fellows playing some game. Then they saw me, and they knew that I was not a local. So one of them came up to me and did a little Indian dance and sang one of the popular Hindi songs. I was shocked, that this little boy knew a Hindi song. So the pull is not just cultural in a lofty sense, but even, Hindi movies, Hindi songs, and so on. Recently, somebody sent me a clip of a dance competition in UK of youngsters. It's all 15, 18, 20-year-old. A mixture of mostly whites. I don't think there was any Indians. There were some Afro type of people. And it was an acrobatic dance. But the song was from the place where I originate, from Kerala. It's a Kerala folk song put to a western beat and danced in an acrobatic fashion. And they won the first prize in that competition. Really shocking, but it is possible. So Indian culture has got a tremendous role to play, and that is something that we should look at. Some years back, our then Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, was given some award, and there was some money involved. He was given. So he started the Singapore India Foundation with that money. And ICC, not ICCI, what's the CCI? What's the name of that? It's Confederation of Indian Industry. They match that fund, and so there's a pool of funds. And this was to be used to promote, relations. But first 10 or 12 years, they had 3 exchanges of speakers. We send somebody. After about 6, 7 months, they send somebody, and they go home, and they maybe talk about it in the dining tables, and nothing else happened. Then suddenly, one day, our former Prime Minister woke up and said, my God, nothing has happened. So he called me and said, what is this? So I said, I was not involved. So he said, well, go and get something done. So now we have changed that to see how we can do some joint cultural activities. I think this is a good move. These are things that we should be doing. And I think if we want the future Act East to materialize into something worthwhile, I think we must find ways of doing it. And blaming each other, saying that, oh, this is so-and-so, Thailand is so difficult to do, the language is difficult to learn. It's all excuses. I think one should set our minds to certain targets and work towards it. And the target must be to improve. First, Herculean task must be undertaken to wipe off very negative impressions that are still prevalent. Because people think that, something or other. You see, India underestimates the optical impact. You come out of this Bombay airport, first traffic light, you see a beggar woman with a baby with matted hair, running nose. You form a certain impression. Oh, this place is not safe. Better not stay here too long. And a Scotsman, business associate I know, told me that he had 2 Singaporeans visiting him for some business discussion. They were there 3 nights, 2 days. Apart from some bottled drinks from the fridge, they did not touch any food anywhere. They stayed in the hotel. They had noodles which they brought pre-packed, which they warmed up and ate, and spent the 3 nights and 2 days on that. So, I mean, these people, when they go back, what do they say? Whose fault is it? I'm not sure. I think it is their fault. If they cannot come to a country and take a risk and move, they should not be traveling. They're poor representatives of Singapore, I would say. But that is the reality. So I don't want to make a huge speech. I've already spoken longer than I'm entitled to. Sitara will be getting very angry. So let me finally say that I'm very happy Prof. Muni has brought this book, and he has addressed many of these problems in the book, and I think I would be very happy to hear the panelists. We have some questions which has already been submitted to us by ISAS scholars, but it doesn't mean that we won't take questions from the floor. We will take it all the same. I hope you have a very good, very interesting afternoon today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pillai. Next, I would like to invite Professor S D Muni, Professor Emeritus at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Distinguished Fellow, Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and co-author of India's Eastward Engagement from Antiquity to Act East Policy, to introduce the publication. Professor Muni, please.
Thank you so much. To begin with, I am grateful to ISAS, particularly Ambassador Pillai and Director Raja Mohan, for organizing this event. In fact, this book would not have been out if I was not in ISAS, because that gave me a long period of interacting with the policymakers and scholars in the region. I had also a little diplomatic assignment in the region. And during this stay, I came across a point which Ambassador Pillai has very eloquently made it, that there were expectations out of India which were not being fulfilled. And I thought there must be an answer to that, why it is that India has not done it. And that prompted me to write this book. If Ambassador Pillai and Dr. Raja Mohan goes into old records, at one stage when I was about to leave the institute, I thought these are the books I want to do. And this was one of the titles I proposed. But then I said the dislocation into Delhi and various other things, in fact, delayed it hugely. It should have been done much earlier. Therefore, the credit for inspiring me and giving me the confidence to write this book quite substantially goes to ISAS itself. I wanted to address 2-3 other questions in this book. And those questions were, to begin with, that there was a general feeling that India's Look East policy started with Narasimha Rao. And I am of very firm opinion that it started much, much earlier. And that's why I have taken it to Antiquity. Now, why I took to Antiquity, because I was almost provoked to start the pen for writing this book by President Obama's speech in Indian Parliament, when he said, you are simply looking at East, you are not acting East, you are not doing enough. And I mean, I react very strongly to some such statements. And first it came to me that, look, we have been looking towards East when America was not even born. So I went into the Antiquity and saw as to how this relationship has unfolded. And then I addressed this question as to why India is not meeting its expectations. Besides the lack of culture, and I may have more to say on the cultural aspect, where I don't quite fully endorsed. I endorsed the idea, but fully endorsed the way culture is being projected even under Act East policy, but that during the panel time. India has not done enough to communicate itself with the region, economically, politically, and culturally. And I think this is where we have faltered. But at the same time, the rupture or the disruption, which Ambassador Pillai very rightly mentioned, between India and the Southeast Asian region, was actually crafted not by either India or by Southeast Asia. It was actually crafted by the Cold War, which divided us. That even when India was and failed to succeed, in fact, I have given some evidence of India even wanted to join ASEAN, but in a different way, not in the way ASEAN was formed to begin with. That even when ASEAN, Southeast Asia was divided, India kept in touch with the other ASEAN, which was kept out, which is, and of course, I mean, in Southeast Asia, it is interpreted more in strategic terms that India was closer to the former Soviet Union, and therefore the Soviet allies they were close to. Actually not. I mean, our relationship with Vietnam, for instance, dates back to the time when Vietnam and China had wonderful relations, and there was no such contradictions there. But therefore I wanted to address this, that look, the interaction between India and the region is very long, and that when we have faltered in not keeping that spirit on, perhaps one has to look on both the sides internally as to what went wrong and how it can be corrected. And in terms of correcting it, as I said, India has not communicated itself properly. And at the same time, there is very little interest, even now I would say, at least intellectually and policy-making wise, in India. And look at this one simple example. You have ISAS in Singapore, but you don't have any parallel of ISAS anywhere else in the Southeast Asian region. That nobody is studying India, nobody is trying to understand India. Now, India also has very poor centers of Southeast Asian studies, but we do have centers of Southeast Asian studies. And in recent years, a lot of books are coming out on India-Indonesia relations, India-Myanmar relations, India-Malaysia relations. Even somebody was telling me they are writing on Indo-Philippines relations now. But no such parallel activity you find in Southeast Asia elsewhere. We have to correct, India has to correct on many fronts in order to meaningfully engage in business, in trade. I remember the government perhaps is not doing very well, but there is some problem even with the private sector in India. I remember in in late 90s, when there was an economic slump and Southeast Asia was in a bad situation, the government of the day at that time tried its best to encourage the Indian businessmen even with the help of Exim Bank, to really go and interact and do something in Southeast Asia, but they are simply not willing. And there are deeper reasons about the nature of economy, most of the Indian businesses are, predominantly family-run businesses. They are not real scientific enterprises. You will find wonderful data if you look into the investments they make in science and in innovations or in terms of research as to how to go to different regions and how to make themselves far more relevant. So there are a lot of problems spread all over, not only in terms of decision making, in terms of various stakeholders in society. But I hope that if this debate is initiated as to why we are not doing what we ought to be doing, something will come out of it. It will stir imaginations, it will stir policymakers, and we may see better days at all. I am very sure that the book is not the final answer to this region. There are several flaws and gaps. I look forward to both Ambassador Keshwani and Dr. Raja Mohan to tell me where those, and also I would say Ambassador Pillai. Even first time I told him, please tell me where the gaps are, where the holes are in the book. That's what I as a student would be more interested in. And to the audience as to what more needs to be done, where we have slipped up, which I would be very personally interested in correcting myself and seeing that we understand each other well and proper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muni. Now we will be launching the publication. May I invite Ambassador Pillai and Professor C. Raja Mohan, Director of ISAS, to join Professor Muni on stage.
Are we ready? Is there a countdown or something?
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now be launching the book. Please. The book is now officially launched. We would like to invite our distinguished guests to please stay on stage for a group photograph. Okay. We would also like to invite Mr. K. Kesavapani, Adjunct Professor, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, NUS. Professor Muni would now present a copy of the book to Ambassador Pillai. Next, we will begin the panel discussion on India's Eastward engagement from Antiquity to Act East policy.